Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Joshua Void, and today we're going to have a really good conversation based on sin. What is sin? Is sin abusive? And let alone, can sin be used to control individuals? And plus, much more. But before anything, I would like to thank our Patreon supporters, Linear and Tart, for helping us do what we love to do, which is create content for you, the viewer. Also, what I would like to thank is the individuals who are within the comments section at this very moment. Linear, thank you for coming. And also, anybody else who's in the comments section, I appreciate that you're here wanting to listen to the show. Now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce a really good guest of mine, Dr. Mark Eastwood. Dr. Mark Eastwood, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me on your show again.
Oh, absolutely. I loved our conversation, which we had last show, and I thought this would be a fantastic conversation because just like how you stated, we missed that part of the conversation was based on sin and how that affects individuals in general, right? And definitely people who are brought up within that ideological thought process.
Yeah.
But before we commence, just in case there's new viewers who are here, do you want to give a little synopsis about yourself or an introduction before we jump on in?
Yes. So hi, I'm Mark Eastwood, and I live just outside of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. So that's why it is dark behind me. It is well into the evening here in the UK. Also, I think we could talk about sin, but I'm not a theologian, so I'm going to only talk from my own experience, and I think that's even better, really, than just hearing it from somebody who studied something. But we'll give some insights, I hope.
But I think that's good too, because I think sometimes you need to hear from the person, from someone's own perspective within this, the idea of sin. Because yes, sometimes theologians are great to really delve into the matter, but at the same time, you need to also hear what the perspectives are, because theologians in and of themselves also take the subjective experience of individuals and then come up with their hypothesis or thesis based on how sin affects individuals in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So before we commence, what is sin exactly? When we talk about sin, what is it? What could we understand from sin?
Well, actually, it's interesting, actually, because, I'm not a theologian, but I'm going to use a bit of theology. But, the ancient church really struggled with it. They didn't quite understand what was all meant. And it was St. Augustine who created this version that we probably all are caught up in about the original sin, which is what we're born with. We're born with sin, and we inherited it from our parents, who inherited from their parents, who ultimately inherited from Adam and Eve. So we're kind of born with this thing, this defect. And of course we know that it's not true, right? It's just that he was trying to find a way of explaining why he struggled so much with being celibate as a priest. And so that before then, there was this belief that it was all to do with the devil. It was external to us. It was always the devil's fault. And people were saying to him, but the devil isn't around you, so why do you struggle? So he had to come and find a kind of a way of thinking about that. And so he came up with this idea, this notion that, well, we're born with it, therefore we're
right. And I think just like how you stated, right, it all started because even in the beginning with the church fathers, there wasn't necessarily an idea based on sin in and of itself.
No.
It was all over the place. And it was through St. Augustine that ended up kind of like solidifying what it means to be one of sin in a sense.
Yeah. So he wrote a number of books, actually quite a lot of books, which was quite interesting back from where he when he was part of the church. And he, a lot of the theology that people believe today all came from him, and his interpretation of what the Bible should or shouldn't be saying. So that kind of their thinking and everything else kind of merged into one. And of course, we read the Bible in the context of something that for most of us is in English, and of course that's translated from a translation, from a translation, from a translation, from a translation, right? So, this whole thing about, being born with it, certainly as a survivor of conversion therapy, this notion of being born gay and then being born with sin, that is really the clash that I lived with, and was the hardest. In my deconstruction of religion, that's the bit that took the longest to undo, because the notion was, well, you're born with it and you need to learn to live with it. And so, and you're gay and that's a sin. And so it kind of solidifies this notion of pray away the gay,
Right.
that actually, therefore, you can, because you're sinful. And so you're born with it, so therefore you can do things to make sure that you don't
or follow the wrong path, in a sense.
Exactly, yeah.
And just like how Linear kind of stated just beforehand, she stated right over here, the idea of original sin and that we are born sinful is really powerful tool, in my opinion. It's easier to explain God killing humans when you view them as sinful, not innocent from birth. So I think like that's a very powerful, what she stated is a very powerful statement, in a sense, because it's true. It's like, well, if we are all sinful, then it is easy to kind of appraise those who are trying to follow God's word. And at the same exact time, those who are falling from the path, let's just say, well, these individuals are sinful and wanting to be sinful and are trying to convince us to follow in that path. And henceforth, these individuals must be, as you stated, re-educated, or they need to be put into these camps, or these Christian camps, in a sense, to, as you stated, pray the gay away or help individuals get away from that, what they believe is negative behavior, in a sense. Or even, sadly, killing individuals in that instance.
And I suppose that's notion of being saved,
right,
and being saved from yourself. And that's, I suppose, we're coming up towards Easter, aren't we? Which always gives me a cold shudder, because it's the sort of celebration of something that is not truthful. At the heart of it is not truthful, and yet the heart of it is what Christianity is all about. Is this sort of celebrating a pagan festival? Just throw that in. But yeah, it certainly it certainly is. It was very difficult for me to divorce those two, and then also be in an evangelical Pentecostal setting where the devil also plays a role, right? So not only are we born this way, sinful, but then the devil uses that for his own gain as well. So you have the internal struggle, but you also have an external impactful being that then tries to use that to their own means. And so certainly being gay was it had its external impactors, everything from Calvin Klein underwear, by the way, right through to being gay. At one point in my conversion therapy, I was told that I must never wear Calvin Klein underwear because they were made for gay men. They were made by gay men for gay men, and if you were struggling with it, you certainly shouldn't do anything or wear anything or be anywhere near anything that could tempt you. So something like that could be a tempt
Right.
and certainly being around any gay people as well. So there's that notion again, and that could lead you to sin. So this
Right.
whole thing around sin was quite central
Right.
for me. And as I say, it was the bit that once I started to go, all right, you know what? I think there's something like 22 different crucifixions that the Romans did of different saviors at around about the time of Christ, supposed Christ. So actually, it wasn't the one crucifixion that was done on somebody who claimed to be the Son of God. Actually, it was quite common at the time for these people to come out of different parts of the region and professing to be this. So, the books are talking about. We don't know. We don't know if those books are actually referring to different people or the same person or what have you.
Interesting.
And as I said, then there were there were these 22 or 25, 22, I think. I'm sure Lynn and somebody will correct me. But this notion that there was only one, because that's the one we read about or taught about from Sunday school to even in our schools, actually. Once I realized actually this is fictitious, that bit was easy for me to do. I just stopped going. I think in the last session we talked about, I just stopped going to church so that I wasn't influenced anymore by the cult. And then there were things that I could do, but the night sweats definitely came from this notion of sin.
Right.
That's the bit that took me a long time, and I can understand people struggling with it. Because I did struggled for a few years with this idea that inherently I was rotten.
But then this kind of goes with my other question that I had, because a lot of times sin is equated to also hell and the hellfire as well, right?
Yeah.
So because of these two, the connection between the two, do you think that sin in and of itself has a power or much more power behind it because of the hell aspect? Or do you think that sin in and of itself is a powerful tool against individuals doing certain things, even if there's not a hell connected to it?
No, I think the hell connected to it is what drives it even more. Because if there wasn't anything that kind of frightened you, that then it was, and I was a child. And you talk about the abuse piece. Well, I was a child being taught this nonsense and made to watch films. The one was called the music of the film. The film may have a different name, but I just remember there being a song, and all these people were left behind. Do you want to be left behind? Because you're going to endure hell. And to a child, that's incredibly frightening and actually quite wicked. I don't think it ever should really be allowed. But, this giving this, people not really being thoughtful about how they interact with vulnerable adults, children. There's a wickedness to that. And, the church is full of very vulnerable people. Right? That's probably its biggest constituency are people that are vulnerable because they are easily led and they are easily taught. And they always say, if you want to catch them young, to indoctrinate. And I certainly was. I mean, I remember at school actually believing things in the Bible that was historical. I mean, that's how I was taught.
Right.
Well, I believed that the history that I was being taught at school was wrong if it didn't match what the Bible said, because the Bible was a history book.
Right.
I mean, what nonsense is that, right? And I was allowed to believe that. And so I used to come, butt heads with teachers because I would say that they are wrong. And I'm right because the Bible says so. And they must have wanted to pull their hair out. But how do you deal with people? I mean, it's really, really hard to try and convince people that there is a different way, and that maybe their thinking is not They haven't concocted that themselves. I mean, I never came up with that stuff. I was taught that nonsense and taught it, as I say, as fact rather than an alternative. Or this is a fairy tale that we would like to teach you. Yeah, no, it was never that. Fairy tales were in lovely little books in the library, but which many of them are equally as frightening, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. And
The
just like the
problem
wide
is so hard, dark.
right?
Those original German fairy tales were very dark. They were meant to scare children, I think, into behaving well.
Yes.
Keep away from the trolls. And in a way, I was taught in a similar kind of way, with this very darkness around sin and how it will consume you. And then, of course, hellfire will get
Right.
you if you remain a sinner. Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure that there are lots of people who I mixed with when I was in the Christian cult who would firmly believe that that's where I'm going right now, because I gave it all up.
Likewise, within my own community as well. When I was younger, I was a Catholic, and then after I went into Islam for a bit, for 5 years, and then I left that and became Buddhist for like half a year maybe, and after decided to go into atheism, and then really saw the afterwards and trying to create a idea, right, that can make sense for me being an atheist as well, which actually helped me big time. But I know that the communities that I was part of are definitely thinking the exact same thing, that I'm going right to the deepest parts of hell in a sense. But it's fine, because I find it kind of the same exact thing as somebody who's a pagan telling me that I'm going to Tartarus, I'm going to Hades. It's just like, well, if one does not believe in those things, it loses its weight, it loses its validity, and henceforth, you can move past that in a sense. So likewise, it's taken almost 10 years, but I've figured out how to deal with that aspect in order to not really look at sin or hellfire in the way that I used to. So, but as you stated, it takes a long time in order for somebody to deconstruct that from their mind, in a sense.
Yeah, because the rest of it is very good stories that once you've learned that, or once you've come to the opinion that they are not truthful, or that they are stories, you can kind of leave those behind quite easily.
Right.
The whole notion of the sin, and especially of it being the sort of notion of original sin, and that you're born with it, becomes part of who you are. Now that's different. That's a whole different ball game to try and get that. It's quite powerful, and so it can really grip you in a very different way to the rest of the religious context. For me, the Christian context, I could leave all that behind. But that notion of that thing that's it was too wrapped up. It was too entwined within me. And especially with the piece about being gay, and then, well, what if I'm wrong? That first bit when you're leaving, right? Well, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm making a big step here?
Right.
And I know for you that must have been even more so, because you made different steps. I mean, I went kind of straight from to being agnostic to sliding towards atheism, but I kind of got there quite quickly. But you changed religion. That must have also been quite hard as well, because that thing around sin. And I think that sin needs hell. Because otherwise it's just like, okay, well, you separated from God and you say, well, I'll take my chances, right?
Exactly.
But that notion that it's got to be tied up. It's got to be tied up together in order to make it more powerful, and that tells me something about it, about the story, about why is it tied up with something that it is so, yeah.
I
I think
completely
it's done like that to control you, um, in a different time.
right. Right, exactly. And towards a certain extent, not wanting you to leave the said religion in and of itself, because it's a very good uh motivator to stay within the religion itself, because it's kind of, you ask yourself kind of the Pascalian wager in a sense, and say, well, what if I am wrong? What if this is the circumstances and stuff like that? And I think the major issue is, or the way that helped me come to understand that or at least this idea, the Pascalian wager, doesn't make sense, is because I can ask the same exact thing from individuals who were the early church fathers. Why didn't you believe in Hades? Why did you believe
Yeah.
in a different idea and aspect of hell? Or even when Christianity started to explode within at least the Western world, why during the Persian time, for instance, or the Sassanids, I should say, why was it Zoroastrianism that took a major hold? And why weren't you convinced of the Zoroastrian aspect of hell, for instance, and the great Azura Mazda, for instance? So right there, we slowly but surely start to realize that, okay, we're not getting into the realm of reality here, because there's so many other hells that are out there, but the Christians only believe they're one hell rather than the plethora of others which are out there. I think that we have a couple of questions though from the comment section, so I'm just going to push those up. Any thoughts on the idea of vicarious redemption?
I think it kind of, it's the whole point of redemption. It's trying to make sense of the crucifixion and trying to make sense of the idea that, you know, God and the Father are all the same, and why did that all happen, and how could that happen? And yeah, it's got to, I think it's got to give it some legs as a story. Otherwise, it would kind of fall rather flat, wouldn't it? Because, as I said, there were others out there who the Romans had put to death because they were preaching their own. There's very similar stories around being the sons of God, and so and that they were the kings of Israel, and therefore they were in direct competition with the occupying force. So they had to go, right. Yeah, I think that this whole this whole imaginary story had to have something, and then there's redemption. And redemption from what? Well, that redemption from your inherent sin, right? So we all are, because there were others at the time of Augustine who were teaching that some people actually were sinless. The
Yes.
lucky ones they somehow were, and I think in the Bible, Jesus does refer to somebody as being righteous. And so they were saying, well, you know, I'm without sin, and therefore I don't really need it. Quite in the same way as maybe you do, because the devil wants you, but doesn't want me. And so I think that made a lot around also with Augustine making his comment. He had to kind of counter that belief, which he saw as being from paganism, and so he wanted to make a change to that. So, yeah, so he created this idea. I think, as I said earlier, he created it for himself as well,
Right.
to justify why he struggled so much with being celibate, because he did
Right.
put it around. And yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting idea about redemption. Redemption without sin is just a useless tale.
Exactly. And there's no way to redemption without sin. So
Yeah.
they're kind of like riding tandemly with each other in a sense. So in order to have some sort of vicarious redemption, you need to have sinful behavior, which then is also associated with hell as well. So it's kind of giving you only two options: hell or redeem yourself, get closer to God type thing.
Yeah.
And any other path away from that is automatic sin that has to be put, or that person needs to be put into hell, or God will send them to hell because it's not like his idea at all. So I find that really interesting about definitely the ideas of sin and the ideas of redemption. And I think that, just like how you stated, it is more for keeping people under wraps, in a sense, keeping people under a sense of control so that those individuals either don't leave the established church, or in and of itself, they don't start to question the belief system that they have. Because I think that's the difference with Christianity than in a lot of other religions, is that it's also based on your thought processes as well. It's not just based on your actions, it's based on your thoughts.
Yeah.
So I think that's deadly as well.
Yeah, and I think for when you're doing conversion therapy, it kind of adds to it. So it's, for me, it wasn't just that I was sinful all the time, because my thoughts were just as sinful as things that I may or may not have done.
Also, GeoSam, you're welcome. It is perfect because we love questions here. So if you have any more, send them our way and we will do our best to answer them to the best of our capabilities. But yeah, I completely agree. It's extremely, and where we see this really taking root, sadly, is within kids. And everything like that. The kids are the ones that are being indoctrinated by this type of control. And obviously, because you when you're a kid, you have more of a not an understanding, how could I say this? You have more of an affinity to want to listen to your parents rather than come up with your own ideas and everything like that. So from that very moment, you're being bombarded with these things and you're thinking to yourself, well, my parents have to be right because they wouldn't lead me astray, in a sense.
Yeah, because you trust them, right?
Exactly.
And so, and I wasn't actually born into a religious family by any means.
Oh.
It became religious. I know she was the beginning of some really awful years for me. But I must have been about maybe 7 or 8, as old as that, when the family then were Christianized. And I think my parents had kind of gone to church a few times and done some stuff, but this was the kind of this Pentecostal evangelical thing, which is full on Assemblies of God. Speaking in tongues, hallelujah, the whole thing. And that was really the beginning of my indoctrination. I was probably as old as that, but I have this memory of before, when they were kind of wonderful party people who threw the most wonderful parties and had people dancing down the street and all kinds of stuff, and then became puritanical evangelists who wanted to save everybody's souls.
But I think
change to witness as a child, but then be told why it was so important to do that, and especially then going back to that thing around sin.
Right. But I think too, I find that the individuals who delve into the more conservative angles or the more cultish angles of Christianity, for instance, are the ones that kind of, like, in the beginning, they never really had the idea, in a sense. They weren't really as well, I don't want to say really religious, but they didn't adhere to the religion to that extent, where it's very methodical within their thought process. And then all of a sudden something happens within their very lives that shakes them to their core, in a sense. And then from there, they delve right into the more conservative, cultish angles of Christianity or other religious prospects which are out there.
Yeah.
In a sense. And I find that that's where, too, the individual, and I think that's the danger behind religion in and of itself, because a lot of people ask me, well, why do you even look at the moderates as also being a problem or an issue? But the reality is that the moderates also predominantly at some point in time go into full conservatism as well, because within your head you already have all these ideas of sin and everything like that, and they just keep mulling around, and at one point that snap, that theological crisis goes on in your head, and then all of a sudden you're now following these tenets to a T, and also trying to not grow your kids, but educate your kids in that same exact lifestyle as well. And that's why I do think that even I forget the word that I just utilized, but moderate theists are also something that I'm worried of as well.
What's interesting, actually, you mentioned that conservative, and it's interesting because within that those groups, they believe that they're progressive because they believe that they follow progressive Christianity, that it's modern and that it's exciting and that it's laying of hands and speaking in tongues and waving your hands in the air and doing and dancing and having modern music, and they see themselves as just quite progressive within the Christian faith. Hardly, actually. They're far more hardline puritanical in their belief structure than moderate, boring Christians who go to, playing the little old lady who goes to the church and sings a hymn and then hears a reading and goes home, and her life isn't impacted in any way. They certainly look down on those people. And I know I did when I was there, and we referred to them as God's chosen frozen, and they kind of only got to the first level of heaven. The rest of them certainly got themselves up, and kind of that wonderful behavior that we witnessed at the last US election.
Right.
And I forget her name now, who was supposedly Trump's spiritual guru. And
I forget her name.
Yes, and she was shouting at, I'll never forget this because I lived in Africa, so I'll never forget her shouting that angels are coming from Africa. I thought they're bloody sleeping. They're not on their way to you. So, yeah, that kind of, like, why would they want to do? Last time they all came from Africa. Yeah, look what happened. Do you really think they're going to save Trump's soul? I don't think so.
No.
So, and interesting, this whole notion that even about being liberal and being conservative and progressive is flipped on its head when you are actually within the cult. They believe their own nonsense with all their heart.
Right.
You've got to give it to them, but yeah.
I think that's right. That's a strong thing too. I think it's because there's certain people, and now don't get me wrong, I do think that there are charlatans within the church that don't necessarily believe their rhetoric, but because they have grown a following, they just continue to spout the nonsense that they've been continuing to spout, like televangelists, for instance.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But I think, too, the other dangerous aspect, and which also equates to the sinful aspect, is that I think a lot of individuals certain individuals actually hold this, as you stated, dearly to them and make it kind of like an ascension to their self, in a sense. They make it and they adapt it to their own way of life, which then helps out, or not help, well, helps germinate, in a sense, the religious idea into other places along with their kids and along with their children's children and so on and so forth, and their cousins and everything like that. So it's very interesting when I find individuals in and of themselves are, how could I say it? They're locked away within the religious idea, in a sense. So they're not locked away within, well, I'm making a lot of money, henceforth this is the way that I'm going to act. But it's like, I really believe in this. And the religious idea is kind of like a buffer towards everything else that is kind of coming in to their lives, such as television or watching something that is secularized or whatever the situation may be.
Yeah, or heaven forbid, drag queens.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to me, the religious ideals and religious ideas in and of themselves, when we really delve into sin, because because Christianity in and of itself has different doctrines within itself. There are certain individuals that think that just works equates to you going to heaven. And other peoples think that it's actually thoughts that are the things that get you to heaven. And then there's a plethora of other. Have a great one, Geo Sam, and thank you for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. And there's another thing that I look at where it's both that are combined together, and you can get multiple different avenues based on how does one get to heaven. So even within the Christian denominations which are out there, what ends up happening is that their ideas in and of themselves can also put themselves into hell, because they're not stout and not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not proselytizing in the right way, or they're not doing the proper practices that are within the proper ways of believing in God and of Christianity. And I find that is the most, how could I say it? Oh, I forget the word, but I find that is the most messed up thing about Christianity in and of itself, because you just never realize which one is the proper version. And if you don't have that right version, then hell is also waiting for you too in the end of the day. It's not just believing in God in a certain aspect.
No, exactly. And it depends which one is right. So
exactly.
it could be that you just need to call on his name and you will be saved. Yeah, and I had a cousin who unfortunately died quite young from cancer, but she had this notion, which I kind of, in a way, I kind of did think, yeah, I'm proud of you for that. That it didn't matter what she did, as long as once a day she just did a little prayer and she just asked for forgiveness. And in a way, then that kind of was her blanket, a little safety blanket was kind of that moment, and being able to just, it kind of didn't really matter. And in a way, that's kind of, wonderfully naive, isn't it? Because they kind of just, that kind of living your life anyway. And then kind of, it says, she's just got one foot in one life and one foot in, just in case, just hedging her bets a bit. Which I know that for other members of my family, that was horrendous. Because that's not how it works. Exactly. That thing about, well, that was her interpretation. And somebody else's interpretation was that you've got to do, it's more than just what you may think. It's everything you do, and all the good works you got to add up as well. You got to keep an inventory of them, because if you don't, somebody else is anyway. And keeping it bad, and if the one outweighs the other, then boing, off you go to hellfire. Which actually I don't really think is. Somebody can correct me, but if I remember correctly, it doesn't really exist very much in the Bible. I think, again, that's an interpretational thing, and whether even Revelations even belongs in the Bible. It's another story, isn't it? The whole thing about all of that. But there are many who believe actually that it doesn't really belong there because it's not. It's kind of the Nostradamus of the Bible. It's just a bunch of rantings that kind of don't mean very much. There's some, of course, who only think that that's where the Bible stops and starts, and that there's this, the rest is irrelevant because we're going to live. I know people who believe in the end times. They live in the end times. It's happening right now, and they've got all the reasons why.
Right.
But
likewise.
Nostradamus was a pagan. Okay, all right. You don't see the irony. That whole thing around, again, it's that gripping of sin, and it is, it's definitely, without a doubt, it was used as a way of making sure that I believed in something, especially as a child. Made me watch these movies that scared me to death. And I think last time we talked, I was saying, watching these movies that tell you about you're going to die and all these horrible things are going to happen to you. And at the same time, I lived in the Cold War, so if the devil don't get you, the Russians are. So it was quite scary. And so it kind of, the obvious thing to do was, my parents had told me I should. And so off I went, and it took a lot to undo. As I said earlier, that thing around sin, because it was so much part of who I thought I was. And the day that it kind of went, there's nothing to do with you. Why are you holding on to this?
Right.
You don't believe anything else, and why is this bothering you?
Yeah, exactly. And I find it like mind-boggling in a sense, in order to see that individual, and I think just like how you stated too, right? It's the idea of it which terrifies people in a sense, because there's no evidence for this. There's no look, see, he did this, and henceforth look at where he went, or whatever. It's only the ideals that we have, or the ideas that we have about hell in and of itself, which then bring, or sin and then hell, I should say, which then somehow formulates us into doing certain things or reneging on certain actions, because we have a feeling that this ever-present personalized being is there watching every single thing that you do to a T, in a sense. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting to really think of that, in my opinion, because it took a lot it took a lot from me in order to realize that. And it took me learning the history of mythologies in order to really start to understand, okay, there's other mythos out there that have a type of hell, such as Hades. Souls were predominantly looked at as things that would wander the underworld. No matter what you did, that's what your soul would do, is just wander the underworld for almost eternity, or if not for eternity, or whatever. And it's only those lucky few that get to go to Elysium and see their ancestors and everything like that. And from there, and going further back into other religions that were there prior to even the Greco-Roman mythos, I slowly but surely started to realize, where I was like, okay, there's nothing that I really need to fear about this. There's nothing that I really need to put onus into this, because it just doesn't make any sense. Because then why doesn't the Christian fear these other, as I stated beforehand, these other hell-like existences or whatever? And it's all based on personal belief in the end.
Yeah, and I think also that medieval art adds to that.
True.
So you got this, it's all well saying, because I think at one point I believed in my head, well, that hell was just separation from God. So, okay, but it just means that you don't have, I don't know, whatever was happening over there with God. But you have something different. Well, not as good, but you have something different. And then it gets punctuated in Sunday school with pictures of parts of the Sistine Chapel and Ponder, and it's got Dante's Inferno. Is what you kind of have in your mind, isn't it? Because if you sort of talk about hell and hellfire and this place where you're going to burn for eternity, and we all know what that feels like because we've all burnt ourselves, right? We all know that the heat, and we know that how horrible that must be. If that's all you're getting for the rest of your life, is that we conjure up images that have been planted out there for us to do, but they come from other people's imagination. They come from other people's interpretation rather than what it really is, because we don't know.
That is correct. Exactly. And I think that is towards a certain extent, that is the nail within sin, in a sense, that kind of like closes it in its own box and kind of shows that sin in and of itself is just an idea, but it doesn't necessarily have any other aspect to it. There's no like real tangible reason for it, in a sense, to believe in it. I mean, it's not a justified true belief. It's just a belief in and of itself.
Yeah.
And that's where we run into, and that's where even with myself, where I was like, okay, cool. Like there hasn't been anything necessarily to see what could be a quote unquote hell out there and stuff like that. Let alone with all these other religions which are out there that have their own aspects of hell, and Christians just don't care about that or whatever. I'm just like, well, why not? You know,
there's only one heaven or one hell, and that's
right.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, then the notion, once the questions started coming, I don't know if you found that, is that they really came. There were times that I'd be quite exhausted, but I would have too many things. If one question leads to something else, and of course, for me, at the beginning of my deconstruction happened pre a digital world. So if I was going to do any research, I had to really and that could be exhausting too, right? Go to the library to find the book. So yeah, I think having a digital presence is so much easier for people now to do some really good research on the whole subject, right?
Right.
You'd have to go and find the book on it, but thank goodness for the internet.
Right, and I think that's
that gives us access to what is storytelling.
Right.
What is actual truth.
Exactly. And I think that's the beauty of the internet. That's the beauty of even like the smartphones and everything like that, is that if you really want to know something, you literally have it at your fingertips now. Yeah. In order to realize that the person is just talking nonsense or speaking out of their arse. And if they're actually stating something, or is there some sort of validity to the statements that they're making. So I think that in and of itself is a hindrance to religion in and of itself, because it was used to being the main book in circulation for quite some time. But now when you have the internet that is there and everything like that, now a lot more people can actually look up certain things and really start to realize, hey, this doesn't really make any sense, because back in this time, this religion was more, and then or Christianity didn't have an idea of an actual hell at the time in the beginning of theology, in a sense, or in the beginning of its theology, I should say. And then from there, you just slowly start to be like, okay, well, then this might mean that this isn't true. This is just another mythos, just like you opening up
Exactly.
to any Greco-Roman mythos or whatever
Yeah,
else.
exactly. It's like the notion of the Trinity is not biblical. It comes much later
Yes.
in the journey of the church, and way later when suddenly it decide, oh no, we've got to have that. That's that's a good idea. Let's all go with that. And the notion that a wafer can. I mean, how gruesome is that? That is the actual blood and the actual.
Right, the actual body of Christ.
Yes. No.
And how about the wine itself being his
No.
actual blood? Yeah, it's messed up when you really start to think of it. It's definitely messed up. But
and
I
interesting that in some parts of the Christian faith, only the priest gets to drink it.
Right. Exactly.
What's happening? What's going on over there? And I think that's the being the beauty of the internet for me is to do much more research, but from the other side.
Right. Exactly.
I know I'm right now, and I'm free, and I'm free of cultish thoughts, and so and that has helped. But it took me all the way to. I must have been about 27 before I really, and that's when I started. That's when I came out, and I started my journey out towards being authentic with myself and being openly gay, but also with being a human being again.
Right.
Actually, I don't know if you've had that experience when you look back. You turn around and you look back down the road and you go,
oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's some times where I look back down the road and I was
I don't need to be spending a whole Sunday putting up things and trying to impress women how many chairs I could carry.
Right. No, it's also the like, even with Islam, praying 5 times a day and everything like that, it gets a little after a while you look back and you're like, I don't need to do that no more. I'm free. I love bacon. Bacon is the best. I'm free to eat that. We're good to go, There's no need for any other thought process rather than just like my own at this moment, And it took a long time, like even with my ideas and stuff like that, because a lot of people think that, oh, okay, well, I'm an atheist now. That means that my thoughts are going to be progressive and all the rest of this. That's not actually true. There's so much that needs to go through it, and you need to look at things and you need to understand things in different ways now. And it's just like, but why? I've been living this way for a long time, and this was the way. Like, for instance, and I'm mind blown even to state this, but my views and perspectives of women when I was younger, in my teens, when I converted to Islam, was more like, okay, these are like delicate flowers that need to be protected. They can't defend themselves. I believe that they have half a mind of a man and stuff like that. So they need to also have me there in order to educate and everything like that. And after the biggest wake up call was Siege Up in University, that showed me that there are women out there that know so much more than I do, And it's just like, okay, well, that's wrong, I guess. Throw that little bunch of lies out the window. But even then, it was just like the amount of thought that had to go into it, into being like, okay, this was a wrong thought process, but why would it be the wrong thought process if it was written within the Quran, which is the word of God in a sense? But now I'm seeing the complete opposite of that, And then slowly but surely, which is like everything just fell to the wayside. But it's true. It's like, and for me, looking back at that, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I even thought of that I can't believe that I even had those ideas in my head and stuff like that. But it's true. You can't run from it.
No, yeah, and that's that sort of brainwashing, isn't it?
Big time. Big time.
Indoctrination that leads us in our thinking in ways that when you're not doing it and you're out of it, you go, how?
Right.
How could I? Yeah. I mean, I do look back and I go, how can I ever have thought that I could have got away with pretending to be straight? Yeah, but now that's easy to look back and think that, right? Hindsight is wonderful, but yeah, I definitely think that, and I think that so much of religion relies on the notion of sin.
I agree.
It's almost at the heart of it. That's why you have the redemption.
Oh, big time.
And that's why you have all the other things. All the other things only make sense in the context of sin. And then once you kind of go to the heart of it and go, really?
It doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, and question it. Yeah, and none of it makes sense, as you say. And the stories, when you start to kind of unpick parts of the Bible, and you think, what is going on here?
Oh, big time.
What is this? What is this really? They don't teach you all of that in Sunday school, that your parents can stone you to death. They don't want to frighten you that much.
That is so true.
Well enough.
Right.
You need those verses to add to the veracity. Yeah, and it's always the loveliest of people teaching you.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Big time. Always the loveliest.
I look back with shame.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. And I do hope that out there is somebody who hears me say it was bullshit.
Right.
And they go, oh, okay.
Right. But
I admitted it. I admitted it was bullshit that I did it. And I taught Sunday school and it was just bullshit.
Right. And I think that's the thing in the end is just that, like, even though that when I look back, I am shamed like a lot, but at the same time, I think that is something that helped me grow to what I am also, right? And I think that when we really look at this, that was a very good building block to have, because I've seen people who don't have religion in a sense, and then all of a sudden something seriously wrong happens, let's just say, or they run into a crisis, and then they run into the arms of religion in and of itself. But I find that once you come up with the reason why you have left, and it's not something necessarily emotional, but it's more also logical afterwards of the reasons why you would leave, or solidify the reasons why you left, then it's harder for individuals to be like, well, now I'm going to go back to this one, or I'm going to go and try this faith, or I'm going to try, because right now you're kind of like, okay, well, I have my logical reasons. It's not any more emotional. There's also reason on top of that helps me underline and wrap it up in a wonderful bow, and to be like, this is the thought process that I'm not going to be fooled by again, you know? So I think that's a wonderful thing, but it's coming up on the hour at the moment. So before anything else, do you want to say any last words?
I think that if for anybody that's struggling, you just got to persevere. It takes time, as both you and I know. It takes some time, and there are days that you have more questions than you have answers, and absolutely fine. It's just you got to keep going with it, and there will be a moment, just one moment, that everything will fall into place, and you will feel that freedom from all of it. But it's one step at a time, and it is a journey.
Oh, big time! That's really well put. It is a journey, and it's one step at a time. This is not a race that you can do fast. This is one that has to be done slow, methodical, and really looking into yourself as well as taking those outward steps also. So I completely agree. And again, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you on again. I absolutely loved the discussion. Thank you.
No, thank you.
And for everybody else who's inside the comments section, thank you very much for showing up. KCA Randy, GL Sam, Linear, and anybody else who's in there, thank you for coming through and just watching our content, because that is what we love to do, is make content for you, the viewer, and have great conversations with individuals like Mark Eastwood. At the same time, if you do want to check out our Discord, we do have a Discord channel now. So if you want to check that out, please do. It is right over here in the link below, but I'm also going to put it in the comment section right here. All right. So thank you all very much, and I will see you next Saturday and Sunday. But as for now, goodbye and farewell.